Maybe we're live. Yeah, we're live. Once again, I need an intro video. Fun fact, actually, everybody, Tribe does the intro videos for the podcasts and shorts and stuff like that, and he still has not made one for this because he hates me. Me, of course, being James McCool, I'm the owner of Paydirt.com, and welcome to Slate Talk. This is a Saturday show that we do. We're going to go over the finer points of the NFL DFS main slate. This is not a regular kind of like play this player or that player type of show. Tribe and Jason handle that show on Thursday going into Friday. That is called The Bakery. You can find that over on the YouTube channel as well and over on PaydirtDFS.com. Actually, I think it's unlisted over on the YouTube channel. You do have to find it over at PaydirtDFS.com. For now, we will list it back up there after Slate locks because that one contains a lot more proprietary stuff. But yeah. So these guys are going to be joining me today. For those of you who joined last week with Scroll Patrol on the show, welcome back. I hope you continue to come back here. For people who are new to the show, welcome to the show. We're going to be talking a lot about kind of the higher level stuff, game theory concepts, ownership, pivots, leverage, stuff like that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce these guys. I mentioned Tribe. He does a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, I think, for us, and is also really, really good at the DFS stuff. Tribe, how you doing today?
I'm good, bro. Next time, ask me to do an intro video.
Well, I'm asking you live if you can do an intro video. We need one because it's such a fucking cold entry, you know. And you did already put together some like sick intro music, so now all we need is like a fucking little video thing. But, you can be mad at me about that later. Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I appreciate everything Tribe does, too. I'd like to see him show a little initiative, though, for the Slate Talk moving forward. Yeah. That's all I'm saying. But I'm doing well. It's freezing cold up here in New York, finally. Winter is here. But, ready to break the slate down and see how we can get an edge.
Pablo is actually in New York this weekend through Thanksgiving. Try to hit him up.
I should. Maybe I will.
We gotta do a meetup. It's only
yeah.
Like an hour. You're like an hour and a half, 2 hour drive for me.
Yeah, you guys are both up there, right? You guys are both top east.
Yeah.
Tribe's probably like even less than that, man. Long Island to CT is
I gotta take the ferry though. Otherwise, I gotta drive all the way around.
Oh, dude, come on! You can't take the ferry. That's all right. I'll drive around and meet you. Don't worry about it.
All right.
Oh yeah, and Mike, he's in New York too.
Yeah, he's what we call upstate. When he hears this, he's gonna be upset because he's not really upstate, but to all of us people in the boroughs, Long Island, he's upstate. So
yeah. That don't count.
Yeah. Anyway, we're we'll do a meetup. I do want to do more of that stuff in 2025. We're gonna do more meetups and more kind of Paydirt community oriented stuff in 2025. But before we get to that stuff, we have to, continue to talk about DFS and sports betting and stuff. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about week 12. From a high view, the content that I have done this week has been really interesting. I wrote up Denver over at Fantasy Life as a stack, which I think is super interesting. I almost wrote up Las Vegas as a stack, which I think is ultra interesting. I have written up Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers a couple different places. So when I am out here and I'm a small field player, when I'm out here writing up Las Vegas and Denver, I think that it speaks to what should be a really interesting slate. The pricing is relatively loose. The most expensive quarterback on the slate is Jaden Daniels at $7K on DraftKings. We have some relatively expensive wide receivers and running backs, but not really. I think you can kind of do a lot of whatever you want, and it is a flipped concept in regards to last week, where last week we just didn't have like value to make things work. So people were doing shit like jamming in Keyshawn Boutte and looking to find Elijah Moore and these guys who are less than 5K. It was just really weird, bad, cheap chalk last week. We even saw it at tight end. Like we saw a lot of cheaper options that were just bad chalk. This week we were talking off camera, and Tribe was saying that he thought the mid-range chalk for players is a little bit bad this week. So why don't you expand a little bit on that, Tribe?
Yeah. So one that stands out is Juwan Jennings, and this one is weird to me. Before Purdy got ruled out, right, and we didn't know that he was not going to play, Juwan Jennings was getting no ownership. Now, granted, it was earlier in the week and maybe things just hadn't adjusted, but it's crazy to me that we've seen his ownership go up significantly with his starting quarterback being out and like them just overall being like a less efficient team. Like that just doesn't make sense to me that his ownership has gone up like 3 times what we originally had it projected as once his quarterback got ruled out. Why are we doing this? I don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I had people asking me, we had a subscriber who was asking me about the Jacoby Myers projection. And he was mentioning like Juwan Jennings and Deebo Samuel. And to be fair, I had fucked up the projections for that specific moment in time. Like I did, for some reason, when I transferred over the quarterback, the passing yards didn't pass on to the wide receivers. And like Deebo Samuel and Juwan Jennings projected for 6 fantasy points each. Sure, fair. I get it. That's a good call out. But Juwan Jennings projecting 1 for 11.46 is not incredible. And I don't think that I'm that far off from the industry. I think that the rest of the industry has him somewhere between 10 and 12 fantasy points. Him projecting for 17% ownership is really weird. The game environment is not terrific. San Francisco's team total is not terrific. I don't really understand why Juwan Jennings would be getting ownership. Jason, do you have any? You look at like defensive matchups and stuff. Is there something people are trying to exploit here, or?
No, I really don't get it. I don't know. Coming into this, if you would have told me that, Brock Purdy's out and now Christian McCaffrey's going to gain all this steam, especially because a lot of mid-range pieces were already kind of chalky. I thought maybe we'd see that a little bit more. Nothing I found really indicates why Juwan Jennings is really the guy for them this week or why you should be going there. Outside of that, he's getting elevated targets, elevated routes. I mean, they play a little bit more zone in Green Bay, and he's pretty good at finding the soft spot, but I couldn't find anything that made him nothing warranting his chalk right now. Not at all.
Yeah.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, I could understand it as a game theory play if his ownership was lower. Like if people were wanted to play him, right, and asking about him because they wanted to pivot to Cortland Sutton or Jacoby Myers, who are also projecting as chalk. I could understand it then, but all 3 of them are projecting to be over 15% owned. So you're not gaining anything other than a significantly lower median and ceiling projection at the same ownership by playing him.
Yeah, feels weird. I ran the pivot finder on the top 7 owned players on the slate based on projections. Obviously, Juwan Jennings is in that cohort. He has 5 pivots that make a lot of sense: DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, Jaden Reed, Calvin Ridley, and DeAndre Hopkins. And the fact of the matter is, with a handful of these guys, like I'm probably not rushing to play Jaden Reed at 5,900, projecting for 13 fantasy points anyway. Like, I think he's probably fine, but look at the projections on these guys. Like, I'm not stoked to play Jalen Waddle at 5,300, projecting for 9. I'm not excited to play DeAndre Hopkins, projecting for 10 fantasy points. I don't really understand. If you were to look at this group and say, okay, so the guys who Juwan Jennings project relatively well against are these guys who just don't project that well overall. Why would I play any of them is really the question. Like, why would I be in this range with this wide receiver? I would probably just try to find a different spot to be. But it is worth noting that all of these guys project for some kind of ownership. Like DeAndre Hopkins projects for 10%. Calvin Ridley projects for 14%. Jaden Reed, 10%. Like, the only one that's actually projecting is low owned here is Jalen Waddle, which tells me that this is a range that people are landing on. And that's why Juwan Jennings, I think, is getting the ownership here, is because, people are frequently landing on this $5,300 to $5,900 price range. And then they say, oh, recency bias says that Juwan Jennings has been really good, so we're going to go with him. My guess is that when the cards flip, what we're actually going to see is Jaden Reed or Calvin Ridley get a bump in ownership here. And we're probably going to end up seeing Juwan Jennings come down. I don't think Juwan Jennings is actually going to be 17% owned. Ownership projections have him there. I do not think that he's going to end up there. I think he probably ends up somewhere in the 10 to 12% range. I just can't see people justifying playing him with a backup quarterback after their team total dropped as far as it did.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's something here in this range. You said it really, really well, James. When I'm trying to find a pivot here in this range, like at the 5K range, you got to think about what do you need to take down a tournament. And I'm talking more from a large field perspective, MME. What do you need from a 5K to 6K wide receiver to win a tournament on most weeks? You probably need them to like minimum 5x, right? Like you would think. Yep. And I look at here and I see a lot of guys that even though they don't project well, we've seen them 5x before in the most recent, season or two, right? So to me, there's no reason to play a guy like Jennings. There's no reason to play, honestly, any of these guys. If you want to roll the dice and pivot, do it. But I think the big way you can gain leverage here is just pay up at 2 wide receiver spots. Like just go do that instead. Go pay down at 2 running back spots. Go pay up at 2 wide receiver spots. Go get Tyreek Hill. Go get a Nico Collins. Go get Amon-Ra, somebody like that. And I think that's a way that you can maybe get some leverage. It almost feels like an NBA slate when you're jamming really, really volatile mid-range chalk and cheap chalk to go get Jokic. That's kind of what this feels like to me. Except I don't know what people are trying to go get besides make a mid-range build. So that's going to be my favorite way to gain leverage is just pay up a little bit more wide receiver and not really live in this mid-range.
Yeah. When we look at overall medians for wide receivers, and I'll add tight ends in this range as well too, right? Because we've been, if you have not been paying attention to Paydirt content, I've basically been saying that you should be using an elite tight end in the flex for like 4 weeks straight now. They're way underpriced. I mean, when you look at Brock Bowers, if you look at the overall range of outcomes and you go to specific positions here and you just say wide receiver, tight end, Brock Bowers projects as the wide receiver fucking 3 on the slate. He's 60.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
You should play that, right? Like Travis Kelce at 5,800 projects as the wide receiver 6 on this slate, right. 7 if you include Brock Bowers. He's 5,800. Like these guys are at a minimum $1,500 underpriced. These elite tight ends. Trey McBride at 5,600 projects,
and that's
really, really well.
And that's the thing, right? Is we're seeing 5,600 Juwan Jennings with an 11-point median projection at 17% ownership, and for what? $700, less than $1,000 more, which you can make that up by just punting a defense, right? Brock Bowers is significantly a higher floor and ceiling play based on where we have him projected at no ownership.
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Like people have been building wrong for a couple weeks now. I think people are still thinking of, early in the season, whenever it was just like, oh yeah, well, you can't play tight ends because they suck this year, and there's a tight end drought and blah blah blah. You remember that for the first 3 weeks of the year?
Yes. Worst position ever.
And then I said on Mondays with McCool with Blender, I was just like, I'm pretty sure that we're gonna hit the midway of the season and elite tight ends are gonna just fucking wreck the league, and they are. But what I did not anticipate was that they would be still just priced in this $6,300. Like, there's no world where Brock Bowers should only be $6,300. And you should continue to exploit that. He should be probably, I would say, if you were going to MME, I don't know how you don't have a considerable amount of him in the flex as a TE2, and treating him like a wide receiver. $6,300, that price is stupid. So I think it's worth mentioning that.
Yeah. And like, honestly, like this is why, just for those you watch, you got to check your own biases, right? Because honestly, a lot of that with the tight ends sucking and like tight end is dead and it's a drought this year is because the tight ends people wanted to do well weren't. Kelce was trash to start the year. Pitts is still trash, right? Kittle has, so like the guys who we know to be elite tight ends, who have the elite tight end narrative, did not perform well. Therefore, all tight ends must be trash this season. And it's like, or, you know, you got guys coming up behind these guys with elite usage and roles like Brock Bowers, you know, Cade Otton, as we saw in Tampa Bay, you know, even before the rampant injuries, you know, he was getting a lot of love from Baker Mayfield. So just because it's not the guy you want to do well does not mean that the position is dead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we think about the way that people are building then for this slate, like we mentioned that this wide receiver range, this ownership is just like really condensed around Sutton, Myers, and Jennings, kind of at the top, and then you can throw Calvin Ridley in there as well. When we are talking about ownership for running backs, Devon Achane is at the very top, 25% owned projected. And I think that sticks. After that, it's kind of interesting that we go up and down here. We have Brian Robinson projecting for the second most ownership on the slate at running back at 21% owned. And then Joe Mixon at 8K, fucking expensive as shit. And then down again for James Conner, 6,500, projected for 16% ownership. And then up again for Christian McCaffrey. So that kind of back and forth, there's going to be a lot of people that are paying with Brian Robinson and Joe Mixon, or James Conner and Christian McCaffrey. Mm-hmm. I don't actually think that many people will be going Christian McCaffrey and Joe Mixon, Devon Achane and Christian McCaffrey. Like I don't see a lot of people paying double up at running back. And the thing about that this week is that you absolutely can. Quarterback pricing is really, really loose. Tight end pricing is really, really loose. Defenses, there's a lot of affordable defenses. There's some good mid-range wide receivers that we can take advantage of. And so I think that it's interesting that people are likely not going to be paying double up. I also, based on ownership, don't think people are going to be paying double down. I don't think that many people are going to be going Brian Robinson with James Conner. I think there's going to be a lot of mix and match with an expensive RB1 and a cheaper RB2. And that kind of opens up a lot of interesting ways to take advantage of that. The other running back that I think is really interesting this week from an ownership perspective is Ramondre Stevenson.
Yep.
On the other side of Devon Achane and kind of on the other side of that Miami game, Ramondre Stevenson has gotten really, really good usage. He did not find the end zone last week. If he did, he would have been a great play. He would have put up 20 fantasy points. I think that he's projected for 8% owned. He's going to come in lower than that because Devon Achane is going to come in higher than 25. I think that Ramondre Stevenson is a really, really good leverage play and probably one of the only pivots that you have to actually make on the slate. Jason, do you have kind of a read on running back stuff here?
Yeah, I do. I agree. Ramondre is a guy that I definitely am going to have in my pool. It goes back to what I was saying before. I agree. I just don't think you're going to see people pay down at running back in two spots when maybe in some builds they should. And conversely, they're not going to pay up. I probably lean more in the pay down camp, and I want to just give a little bit of a buyer beware out there too, or just another way you can gain leverage. Brian Robinson's a great play. I don't need, everybody can tell you that. That's no secret. But in a game where they're such massive favorites and they've shown in these games where they kind of, blow teams out, if you think they blow Dallas out, there's a chance that they have four different guys score a touchdown. They're not really built to have one guy really just go and take all the usage. It makes a guy like Ramondre such a really, really interesting pivot. And also another guy that I'm surprised is not more owned. And what I mean more owned is that he's not near Achane and Brian Robinson. It's Kenneth Walker. These guys that are in that mid 6K range outside of James Conner feel like they're in no man's land. So it's weird. Other weeks it's been like running back. It doesn't really matter who you play. This week, I look at it as, and you better just not overpay, right? Like I feel like some of these guys that are higher salaried are in some sketchy spots, and I think you pay down at both and just pay up at wide receiver, or go grab a high end wide receiver, high end tight end. I think you're automatically going to just gain a leg up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tribe, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I want to shout out my small field GPP players because I want to highlight something here with what you said, James. I agree 100%. People are going to be going high-low. And so if the chalk high-low pairing is Devon Achane and Brian Robinson Jr., and you're trying to avoid just playing a cash lineup in some of these smaller or high-dollar GPPs, like understand you're not being sneaky by pivoting off of Achane for Mixon or McCaffrey. Like that's not the pivot, right? You're not being sneaky pivoting off of Brian Robinson for Kareem Hunt, who's not showing up on here, but I guarantee you like his ownership is going to jump up like in the next run, right? Like that's not the pivot. The pivot is you go to a Ramondre Stevenson instead of Brian Robinson. Like that's the actual pivot there. So just be mindful, like when you're looking at some of these ownerships, like going from the 20% owned guy to the 16% owned guy is not like the contrarian flex you think it is.
Yeah, it just doesn't give you as much relative value as you think. It's you really have to pay attention to. It was kind of like what I was talking about with the pivot finder when I ran it, and we were pointing out Juwan Jennings. It's like, yeah, you can pivot off Juwan Jennings, who's projected for 17% ownership, but you're pivoting onto a guy who either has somewhere between 12 and 15% ownership. So it's like, why the fuck would you play any of them? If you really want to get off of Juwan Jennings at 17% ownership, you play in a way that gives you a roster construction that doesn't allow you to have him. That's the best way to go about it. Or you play a Deebo Samuel. You get direct leverage on him, where you're looking at trying to use Deebo Samuel or George Kittle. George Kittle, I think, is going to come in pretty low owned as well. Looking for ways to score fantasy points that could belong to Juwan Jennings, but then can't because Deebo Samuel scored all of them, or George Kittle or Christian McCaffrey or whatever, right? That same concept can be applied here to Devon Achane, where it's like, I really like Miami stacks again this week, not only because they're leverage off of Devon Achane, which I think is awesome, but also because this is a spot where I think, we have seen that this was a point brought up by Pablo initially a couple weeks ago, that the Miami offense is very timings based. And so there had to be some rust that needed to be knocked off by this offense. And I think that we saw a lot of that rust knocked off last week. And now I think it's Tyreek's turn. And I think that it's Jalen Waddle's turn. And I think the offense is back on track now. And so if we think that way, Devon Achane, while he has been very good, and I think he's a really, really good play, if you're not playing Devon Achane, I think you should, in like half the lineups that you don't play Devon Achane, I think you should be playing Miami stacks. Because I do think that they're probably going to get there. I mean, they have a good team total. Their team total is, I'll find it eventually here. Or is it? Yeah, 26.75. Like that's pretty good still. If we sort by team totals here, Detroit is the most at 29.5, then Washington, and then Miami at 26.75. So their third highest team total here. Somebody's going to score those points. It's going to be some mix of Achane, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Jonnu Smith, right? Like it's probably those four people. So if you can stack, well, 35% of the field has Achane, then you should do that in some amount of lineups. I would say probably half the lineups that you don't have Achane. You should probably be stacking Miami. I think the same thing kind of with San Francisco. The hard part is with San Francisco, it's like with a backup quarterback, do you really want exposure to any of them to leverage Juwan Jennings? I would say probably not. Their team total is going to drop. They're now underdogs, right? Like it's not that great of a spot. So it kind of feels like the Juwan Jennings spot is just a spot that you can pretty easily avoid. There's other chalk that I think is harder to get away from. When we go and look at wide receivers like Cortland Sutton, we mentioned him, Jacoby Myers. I think that we should talk a little bit about the Cortland Sutton thing because he is projecting for 20% owned. In small field, I have him at 27% owned. I think he's probably going to end up 25 to 30% owned across the board. But man, I don't know if you guys have seen his baselines. They're fucking sick over the last 4 weeks. He's basically the wide receiver 5 in the league over the last 4 weeks. So I find it hard to get away from him at 5,800. At the same time, let's not act like Bo Nix is really, really good. I think that he is probably shaping up to be the second best rookie in this class from 1 year. He's behind Jaden Daniels, but there's a lot of question marks on this class overall. I think that it's completely reasonable to say Bo Nix maybe is not going to be able to feed Cortland Sutton to a 25-point fantasy ceiling here at 30% owned. And then we just have another one of these wide receivers in this mid-range that failed us. I could see, Jason, I think you, or no, Tribe, who was it that was saying that the mid-range wide receivers were shaky?
Me.
Yeah, I thought so.
Both, yeah.
Yeah. Both of you were talking about it. And like, I could see Sutton, Myers, Juwan Jennings, and Calvin Ridley all being fucking terrible on the slate.
Yep.
Like, Calvin Ridley has a shitty quarterback. Cortland Sutton has a maybe shitty quarterback, has been better as of late. Jacoby Myers has a shitty quarterback. Juwan Jennings has a shitty quarterback. Maybe we just shouldn't play a 20% owned wide receiver with a shitty quarterback.
Yeah. I'm in complete agreement, and I'm going to go on record and say this. I get he's getting a lot of work. I kind of think Jacoby Myers is like some of the worst chalk of the season. Like when I look at like highly volatile chalk, I get he's projected well, but they did this with DeAndre Hopkins too. He had a really, really big week, and then he's going up against arguably the best passing defense in football with the best cornerback in football that shadows people, and DeAndre Hopkins was like 30% owned. Now we're doing it with Jacoby Myers, and he's got Gardner Minshew throwing him the ball. Like, what are we doing, man? Like, to me, I kind of think it's ridiculous. And just to give you guys some other like leverage plays from a scheme perspective, you have a guy $200 cheaper in Alec Pierce in a game where they're going to be trailing in a dome, and they're going to let Anthony Richardson just throw the ball and chuck it. You have Xavier Worthy, who's going up against the most zone-heavy team they're going to play, and he's kind of inept against men and really, really strong against zone. Christian Watson is starting to come into his own. Jalen Waddle, James, I totally agree. I think these Miami stacks and wide receivers are really going to start to find their groove. I just don't think it's even worth exploring. Like, I look at him and I'm like, are you going to be able to get me a 30-point outcome or close to it to win a tournament this week in large field? I think there's very few ways he does it. So it's tough for me to eat that. I get people got to save salary somewhere. I can't do it. I feel better about Sutton, like you were saying. I feel like his role's a little bit more secure. He doesn't have a Brock Bowers on his team who's taking targets from him. But yeah, this is very, very shaky here. Like everybody from Jacoby Myers to Juwan Jennings, even Calvin Ridley, like just buyer beware on every single one of them. You can poke holes at everybody.
Yeah, Tribe, you want to add?
Yeah, I agree. Like with Alec Pierce and those other guys, like who are, a little bit lower in price, I think, than these guys. But the thing is, one, like you said, with Anthony Richardson, Anthony Richardson is going to be chalk, but nobody's stacking him. So if you want a way to like eat that chalk and just pair him with a low-owned receiver, so you skinny stack with him, do not double stack, but skinny stack him with Pierce, who has no ownership and is leverage off of these guys, right? You can do that. Xavier Worthy, right? Kansas City has the fourth highest team total. He's probably going to be leveraged off of Kareem Hunt. So you can go there. And then I also think going in the other direction, going slightly higher, is going to be lower owned as well, right? Where you got guys like DK, you got Geno. Well, I think Seattle's going to be somewhat popular, but like they're still going to be lower owned than these 5K guys. So you got Jackson Smith and Jigba, DK Metcalf there, who absolutely, have monster ceilings. So like we just saw JSN put up a 40 burger 2 weeks ago. So
dude, we just saw Jamison Williams do it on like 4 targets, right? Like that's where that's why I mean, like it makes no sense when you could just go a little higher or a little lower. You're in better game environments. Like Josh Downs is going to be 1.4% owned against a pass funnel defense in a dome where his team's going to be trailing, right? Like Marvin Harrison Jr. in a basically a pick'em game in a great game environment where you've seen Kyler and him start to, kind of figure it out a little bit. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to X these guys out of my pool. Like that's just crazy, but I'm definitely going to be under on all of them for sure.
Yeah.
I want to point out this comment, correlate RBs against backup QBs. You know what? I'll buy that. I'll play Josh Jacobs and the Green Bay defense against a fucking backup quarterback. I'm fine with that. I will say that like with running back stuff, Josh Jacobs projects well, and it's going to be 15% owned. I don't know how owned the Green Bay defense is going to be, but like I'd be fine with buying that, especially if Juwan Jennings is going to be 17% owned. I think that what you gain from that, though, you kind of lose in that Josh Jacobs and Kenneth Walker and David Montgomery, these guys are absolutely kind of in no man's land in terms of price. And it ends up putting you in a weird roster construction spot. So I would just be wary of that. I totally agree. Correlate running backs and defense against backup quarterbacks. Fucking fine with me. But like, don't kill the rest of your roster to do it. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people will make. If the way that you're building out allows you and affords you Josh Jacobs and that range of running backs, I think that's fine. But I guess I wouldn't start with Josh Jacobs in the Green Bay defense and try to build around it. Like, if it works, it works. Cool, that's fine. But I'm not going to start with that. I wanted to note really quick, because of that Anthony Richardson comment. How is Josh Downs 1% owned at 6,200? That's pretty crazy.
I'm dumbfounded.
Because everyone is playing naked Richardson.
Why?
Yeah, it's so dumb. Like, this guy just went up against a much, much harder, defense. I get the Jets are a dumpster fire, and we could get into that, later. But like, this guy against the Jets looked pretty competent. Like, people really underrate how much sitting and watching and slowing yourself down. People forget this guy played like fucking 4 games last year and then got hurt for the entire season. And now you have Josh Downs, who's, I mean, you name a team that hasn't had, some sort of passing success against Detroit. There was even some catches last week with Jacksonville that they even looked competent on some drives and just didn't finish them. But like,
again, people got to check their biases, right? The narrative is his ceiling is because he runs. He's not a great thrower. At their prices, there's one-offs that I think, if I'm looking at median projections, there's receivers in the same range or priced lower than them with higher median projections. Therefore, they're a better 1v1 play. Like,
it's crazy, man. And also, James, just to tout your research sheets, when you go and look at the research sheets, over at Paydirt DFS, there's 3 starting receiving options for Indianapolis this week that have a season-long ADOT over 10. And I bet if you go and look at Josh Downs' last 3 or 4 weeks, he's probably close to that too. I know he's more their possession receiver, but he's also a burner as well. Like, you could just go get so much upside in the same salary range, and versus a guy like, I'll go look up Jacoby Myers really quick just to see what he looks like from that perspective. And yeah, like, Jacoby Myers has a season-long ADOT of 8.8.
Yeah.
Like, what upside are you even getting? Like, what is he gonna go 10 for 90 and hopefully fall in the end zone? Like, I don't understand.
That is exactly what people are playing that for, which is crazy to me.
Well, good. I talk about all the time the New York Giants thing. Where it's like, anytime the New York Giants wide receiver was chalk, it was just like, okay, your best case scenario, Daniel Jones, a quarterback, which RIP to that man, truly. Any wide receiver with him as a quarterback, the ceiling was basically 7 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown. That was like the best case scenario that you could get with any wide receiver with Daniel Jones until we got Malik Neighbors nuking 2 slates in a row. But then, pay attention to what happened after that. He basically became 7 for 70 and a touchdown. Because that was the ceiling of what a New York Giants wide receiver could be. So anytime that a New York Giants wide receiver was chalk, it was just like, if that wide receiver ain't 3K, you're not getting value out of them. They might get you 15 to 20 fantasy points. That's probably not winning a GPP unless they're super highly owned. So there are ways that it works, but I think that if you're gonna play a guy like that, like what you would do, get fucked. I'm not.
That's it. You're canceled. You're canceled, James. You're canceled.
Yeah. We're canceled. If you're gonna play a guy like that, if you're going to eat chalk on somebody who has like a justified ceiling of 7 for 70 and a touchdown, you had better pair them with their quarterback. Because the only way that you're going to get a real ceiling out of that wide receiver is if that quarterback has a 2 standard deviation game as well. And that's why Las Vegas stacks in the models look good, right? When you look at the team stack range of outcomes and you sort by median, there's a reason why this Las Vegas stack looks good. And it's because if Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, who project together for like 34 fantasy points or something, if they get there at high ownership, Gardner Minshew at low ownership and a low salary is going to crush. So Las Vegas stacks, if you're going to play Jacoby Myers, I think you should be playing Jacoby Myers with Gardner Minshew. Now, Brock Bowers, as the wide receiver 3 on the slate and 6,300, you play him naked all fucking day. Like, who cares, right?
Big Dick Brock. Big Dick Brock.
That's huge Dick Brock. Dude's just laying his third leg across the goalpost, you know? Like, you can play him in the flex. It doesn't matter. You can play him fucking as an individual all day. But, like, Jacoby Myers, you guys are right. If you're going to play Jacoby Myers, I think you should probably play him with Gardner Minshew. At the very least, you should be playing him as a secondary correlation against a Denver stack. I think that he makes a much better correlative piece than a one-off. I also want to note Downs project for 7% on Roto-Grinders. I think he'll probably show up somewhere in the 3 to 5% range, maybe 3 to 7% range. I could see that. But the point is, I don't think he's going to get much ownership at all. I think most people, it's going to be one of those things where people look back and they're just like, we should have probably just paired Josh Downs with Jacoby Myers, especially because this mid-range wide receiver chalk just generally not that good. Ed Mass, who is a huge Detroit Lions fan, shout out to the Lions fans, clapping.gif, name the last wide receiver to get 101 versus Detroit, though. I don't actually know that off the top of my head. However, what I would say is that they have been beating teams to a bloody pulp all year. And I think that maybe it's a morale thing rather than a defense thing. But I will say, actually, I should probably go look up what their stats are.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about who they played, so their last few games, Tennessee Titans at Green Bay in that really weird weather game, the Houston Texans without Nico Collins, and the Jacksonville Jaguars with a backup quarterback. I can't even think of his fucking name right
Mac Jones.
Right? So, oh yeah, Mac Jones. Okay, so I get it, but like, look at who you're playing, right? And if I remember correctly, Tennessee scored on them quite a few times because they set up a short field on them too. So I get like the yards thing, but man, this is probably one of the better teams that they're going to face. And I'm not saying the Colts are good. Like, I expect them to get smoked, but they're a little bit more competent on offense than some of these other teams, for sure.
So this is data from Fantasy Life, which, by the way, if you didn't know, I do a lot of the back-end work for fantasylife.com. But this is the fantasy boost allowed to wide receivers. Detroit does allow 4.2 PPR above average rate to opposing wide receivers. They are a good matchup. They allow 7.7 more targets than average to opposing wide receivers for an average 22.7 targets per game. They allow a targets per route run boost of 3%, allowing, I think, the best targets per route run rate in the league, as well as a receiving yards boost of 42 yards to opposing wide receivers, which, again, I'm pretty sure it's top 3 in the league, only behind the Ravens and the Jaguars. So definitely a spot to exploit. Absolutely a spot to exploit. I think that Anthony Richardson is a good play. I would not play him by himself. I think that you should probably be playing him with Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman. I wrote up the under on Michael Pittman receptions earlier today. And like, as I was writing it, I was like, this is going to lose. Like, I was looking at it like, I shouldn't write this, but the algorithms love it. And so I have to, because I have a product that I have to be true to. But yeah, I was looking at that. I was like, nah, he's not going to have under 3.5 receptions. He's probably going to have like 4, and I'm going to tilt it for a week. But yeah. I think that Indianapolis stacks are really, really good, especially if Anthony Richardson is going to be naked. Like, you should probably just be pairing him with his wide receivers, and that's the way to get the relative value on the field.
Yeah, it's 100%. One of those things. I totally agree. It's like Anthony Richardson, naked, probably the worst play on the slate, or one of the worst plays. You pair him in a stack, arguably one of the best. It's just, it's also how does somebody like him get there, right? It's he's not going to just run 3 in, right? He's going to have to do something with his arm. So I love it. And sorry, Ed Miss, but I am attacking Detroit whenever I can with good wide receivers and quarterbacks.
Yeah, I'm with you. This point, Max Cooper, Tua is $100 more. I do really like Miami stacks.
Same.
Like I talked about Miami stacks earlier on, and I think they're terrific. But here's the thing. Okay, so I wrote this up in the DraftKings Nation article, which you can find a contest sims breakdown over there. And yeah, he's 200 more. I wasn't going to call you out on it, but he's self-correct. I wrote up on DK Live that I think that when we look at the way that stacks are put together in the contest sims and kind of algorithmically how these things win, I think that there's an important understanding of how things end up winning a slate and why we are playing them. When you are playing a Miami stack, you're not playing it because you think that Tua is going to win the slate. You're playing it because you think that Tyreek Hill and Jonnu Smith are going to carry Tua across the finish line. When you are playing a Washington stack, this was the example that I made in the article. When you're playing a Washington stack, you're not playing Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz because you think that they are going to pull Jaden Daniels across the finish line. You're playing them because you think that they will have enough volume and upside from Jaden Daniels pulling them across the finish line. So having an understanding of where the actual emphasis is on the stack that you're choosing, I think is really important. And that point applies to Anthony Richardson and Tua here. With Miami, you're not playing Miami because of Tua. You're playing Tua because you are wanting to use Tyreek Hill and Jonnu Smith. I'm like, why wouldn't you just correlate them with Tua? With Anthony Richardson, you're playing Anthony Richardson because you think that he is the upside and engine of Indianapolis. And then you say, well, then why wouldn't I also just play Alec Pierce and or Josh Downs? Now, whether you want to play them as a skinny stack or a double stack, that's roster construction choices. And that more really depends on larger field or smaller field. In smaller fields, you're probably playing Anthony Richardson or Jaden Daniels with one of their wide receivers. In larger fields, you're probably playing them with two of their wide receivers so that you can maximize your correlation. But it all comes down to where's the emphasis? Where's the engine of that lineup and that stack? Why are you playing them? And then let that dictate how you should be approaching comparing them to other stacks. So Indianapolis and Miami, sure, like Anthony Richardson is $200 less than Tua, who projects for 2 points less, but you're never making the choice of I'm stacking Indianapolis or Miami based on the comparison of Anthony Richardson versus Tua. You're making the comparison of the entirety of the stack together and where the upside comes from. So I just want to talk that out really quick.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff.
No support from the people that are here on this podcast.
I was waiting for a question, honestly.
Right.
It's funny because usually I'm the podcast host here, but usually it's Pablo just fucking talking our ears off because he loves to talk.
Condensed.
Not him today. No, completely different clientele.
But James, you bring up a good point though, just about thinking it through in its entirety. And I think the other thing that people, I know people know this that play NFL DFS a lot, but you also have to really consider the target tree with your quarterback, the condensed nature of it also. I think if you ran, I'm just making this up, but if you ran 20% Tua stacks in an MME portfolio, I think it's perfectly reasonable that you have Tyreek Hill in 80% of them, right? So I think that's the other thing you got to think through, especially when you look at a quarterback, like you said, you wrote up Denver and Bo Nix. If you stack Sutton with Bo Nix, let's just say, that to me, anything after that, whoever you pair with him is an absolute crapshoot. I think even in large field, you could just go QB +1. But yeah, when you're comparing these stacks, you don't want to do it based upon just the quarterback projection. You want to do it with the totality of its stack. And I could bet any money that a Seattle double probably has a chance to outscore a Denver double, just as an example. just because of the nature of the target. So that's just something else I want everybody to really think about is don't just base it off of this quarterback's projected well, so I got to stack and I have to have 2 pass catchers with it. If it's very, very thin and you can't, it's hard to decipher where it's going to go, either set MME caps or just pick one, right? Just pick one and leave it at that. So it's the only thing I wanted to say in response to that.
I will also say Nuck, Sutton, Bowser, love it. Yep, love it.
Yep.
I think that because I wrote up, like I said, I wrote up Denver sacks over at Fantasy Life, and one of the reasons why is because Las Vegas projects so well that like it's hard for me to just ignore them as game stack correlation pieces when Sutton and Nix and Bowers and Jacoby Myers all project really, really well. I'm like, man, I should be game stacking there. Like, why would I not overstack that? That seems like a sick Millie Maker play, actually. Like Minshew plus Sutton plus Bowers plus Jacoby Myers. How's that? How's that for a Millie Maker play? That's sick. Now, granted, for sure, that's like a super volatile thing, but that's the kind of lineup that you want to play in the Millie Maker.
Yeah.
I can see myself for sure having like anytime that I use Cortland Sutton, it's probably across from Bowers or Myers, right? Like, but I really only want to use Myers when I have him with Gardner Minshew. So,
can I ask you some about that real quick?
Yeah.
What is your thoughts? Like, if you play that stack, like with your remaining positions, right? Like, are you focusing on like really high upside spots? Because I'm thinking through this, like, right? Like, even if I play the Raiders stack and relative to price, they go off. Like Bowers goes off, Jacoby Myers has a good game, right? There's still like a good chance, even with Minshew doing well. Like, there's really not a scenario where Gardner Minshew, even in the event they go off, is going to be QB1 fantasy-wise on the slate.
No.
Right? You're not playing that stack because, like, you're expecting that, right? So do you feel like when you're playing those types of stacks that you still want to make sure you're still getting upside from your remaining positions? Like, you don't want to do that and then play, like, middling plays to fit it in.
Well, so I think that it's just less about how you want to consider like what you expect out of the rest, right? So this is kind of the base, right? Is Minshew plus Jacoby Myers plus Cortland Sutton and Brock Bowers.
Right.
And the total ownership here is only 42%. Typically, you want to aim for somewhere between 90 and 120% if you're playing, general GPPs. In the Millie Maker, you can have under 90%, but for the most part, under 90%, you're going to be kind of fucked. So when I look at this base, I'm not really thinking to myself, what are the highest upside options? All I'm thinking is, first off, how do I get more ownership in this? If I want to aim for 90 to 100%, 90 to 120% ownership, I have to add in a lot of ownership. So first off, obviously, I'm going to add in Devon Kane.
Right.
I have no reason not to play him. I will probably also then add in Brian Robinson Jr. because, again, like I have no reason to fade these guys. If I have Gardner Minshew and like a Las Vegas stack, why would I get away from it? So now my ownership's at 87%, which is more acceptable. Like that's probably fine. At that point, then, yeah, I probably am thinking, where are some spots that people are forgetting about, or where are some spots that I can find a little bit more upside at wide receiver? And with something like that, Jackson Smith and a Jigba, or, even Tyreek Hill, like we have $35K in salary used here. If we go Tyreek Hill and try to get, even more of that Miami offense with HN and Tyreek Hill, now we're pushing up to 100% ownership. And then we have these two pieces left. We have $7,700 remaining. That probably gives us about $4,500 to $5K to use in the flex. Who would you even go for if you were trying to find upside there? I guess we'd sort by 3X and say Dobbs or Demario Douglas. Demario Douglas actually would probably be the best play here since you have Tyreek Hill and Devon Kane. So let's go ahead and add that in.
I think you kind of answered my question because by adding in, to your point of like you have this low ownership, you want to get to that kind of that target range with ownership, you're going to add in some of the chalkier pieces. in theory, a lot of the times those chalkier pieces are chalk because they project really well. And so as far as like medium projection, ceilings, and upside, a lot of times you're going to cover that by putting in some of those chalkier guys. Like once you put in Devon Achane, like I think he also projects like the best of like all the running back plays on the slate. Right? If I'm not mistaken. So
yeah, HN projects,
yeah. So there's like that overlap there of like you're covering like your, kind of that upside with like putting in some of that ownership to balance that out. Okay.
I obviously don't know how much any of these fucking defenses cost. But you can definitely, you got $3,200 here remaining. Fill this out.
Who said that?
Packers
so
defense.
This is a really good lineup for like a million maker, right? Even at 102% ownership, like you could even probably play this in a smaller field at 102% ownership. I don't have any problem with that. Hey, yeah, Ike, go fuck yourself, all right? I'm not the pronunciation guy. I've pronounced Achan and Akan and Akon, whatever the fuck. I don't do this.
It won't let me out.
Fight me forever. But yeah, I think that what you do if you start with your relative value piece of Gardner Minshew or Las Vegas stack, or if you start with Ramondre Stevenson, right? It's kind of the same concept. What you should first be trying to do is say, okay, I already know that I have a 1% owned player that's going to give me a whole lot of relative value. I don't need any more relative value, really. So, fill in some chalk and then see where you're at. And then we got up to, before we locked in Tyreek Hill, we were sitting here at 91% ownership. Like at this point, you actually don't want to eat that much more ownership if you're trying to pass the field. So we do kind of want a lower owned piece like Tyreek Hill, or a lower owned piece. We could go over, and if we're looking for upside, so to Tyreek Hill, we could go Jackson Smith and the Jigba, who is, I think, projecting for 14% ownership. That's a little bit higher, but that's fine. Like he projects well. You go a little bit lower, and you could go to Jaden Reed, or you could go Mike Evans, right? Mike Evans is going to be like 1% owned. It all kind of depends at that point. After you've filled in kind of this framework of stuff, this is usually the way I build. I'll build a stack, and then I'll build my running backs, and then I'll think about what I need from the last couple pieces. Those are the kind of slates that I think are really, really good, because you solve a lot of your own problems early in the lineup building process, and then all you're doing is just finding ways to pass the field. It takes away a lot of the coin flipping bullshit that you have to deal with. If you start your lineup, like I said before with Josh Jacobs and the Green Bay defense, if you start your lineup with that, like where do you even go from there? Like you don't even you put yourself in a position where the rest of your lineup is kind of like, well, I guess I'll play this chalky team and then see where it leaves me at wide receiver. Or I guess I'll play these one-offs and then see if I can fit a quarterback. I like starting with a running back defense correlation, or even starting with two running backs. I think starting with running backs is generally bad, because it gives you a lot of question marks about the way that you're going to build out your offense and where you're going to find your upside. That I don't think works as well as starting with a stack and then finding out, okay, I used a really popular stack. I know that I need to have a lower owned running back, or I have a low owned stack. I know that I need to have high owned running backs, right? Like, I think that just makes for a more natural way to build. Jason, you use optimizers and you 20 max a lot. Is that kind of the way that you look at things?
Yeah. So what I usually do in MME is I like to figure out more of, how do I phrase it? I don't really start with my running backs, and like when I'm trimming my pool, I start at quarterbacks. But the first thing I do all the time, just so everybody knows, is a way that they can find the leverage points we're talking about easier, is I'll run the optimizer for 250, 300 lineups just on ownership. And I just want to see like who's popping up the most. I don't mess with any exposures. Next thing I do is I start with the quarterbacks, and I'll take a quarterback, the max ownership on quarterbacks, and I'll set it to like 20%. And I still don't touch anything. And I just want to see by ownership, like who's going to be coming in the most. And then from there, you'll be able to see really, really quickly, especially when you sort those high owned lineups by projection. sometimes it can scare you a little bit, and then you find out really quickly where to pivot. I don't start a running back at all. They're actually the last piece of the pool I really touch, just because I think at tight end, actually, let me go back to running back. Tribe, you said this on the bakery. The range of outcomes are not super different amongst most of the running backs from week to week, as opposed to wide receivers and tight ends. So I actually leave that for last, and then I play more of an ownership game in my lineup. I might set caps. I might set a rule that, like, if I have a stack that's this low owned, I want like one of these 3 running backs in the lineup, something like that. So I'll set rules like that for myself.
Question here, Max Cooper. Appreciate the question. How likely are you to build with late swap optionality on the slate? Typically, late swap stuff is a little bit overblown. We're talking about NFL specifically. NBA, it's vital. Like NBA, you have to care about it. Point blank, period. You should not be playing NBA if you don't care about late swap. But NFL, you should care about late swap, but only as it pertains to the position that you are in a GPP at the point of deciding on a late swap, right? Because of the dynamic that we have with NFL, unless there is late breaking news that you really have to give a shit about, you're not usually building in kind of like ways in or out to more or less chalk. Now, on a slate like this, where we don't have all that much value, I guess you could probably put a little bit more emphasis on it and say, you hope that somebody gets ruled out or somebody who's questionable ends up not playing, something like that. But for the most part, I'm not going to care all that much about it any given week. I don't know if you guys have any like different thoughts on that.
Not really. The only thing I'll say it's week to week for me. Like for instance, this week we have a shorter slate. There's 3 games at 4 p.m. Eastern time, and 3 games. There's Denver, Las Vegas, San Francisco, Green Bay, and Arizona, Seattle. Those are 3 games that the optimizer, the sims, the range of outcomes, they all like pieces of. So I think this week I probably don't care about it, because I'm already going to be building with these 3 games in mind pretty heavily when I initially start. So this week, definitely not. Other ones, maybe, but yeah, I'm with you. I don't really, I don't strategize for that often, unlike NBA, where you have to be at your computer for 4 straight hours.
Yeah, it's not something I preemptively think about. It is something I think about like as the games are happening, like we get the early wave of games. Once we get to about, I would say 3 o'clock Eastern, 3:30, right? I'll start looking like, where am I at in the contest I'm in? Is there opportunity to, make a swap to try and pass the field based on what's happened so far, how things have played out? But preemptively building, I'm not really thinking about it at all. That's
a good point, Tribe. That's something that I should have mentioned too. I will still scan though to see, like, if I'm at the top of the leaderboards, and my initial stack is killing it, it's low owned, and there's not a big opportunity for anybody in the 1 p.m.s to really pass me, I might then swap onto some ownership to try and keep me up there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only thing that I should say is I don't plan for it pre-slate, but I will look at it right around that time, 3:30, and just examine like, where are my outs to jump up the leaderboard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you should care about that a lot. You should be looking to block people if you have a lead, and you should be looking to pass people if you are Operation Min Cash. There's been a lot of times when I have been just fucked on the early games. And then I'm coming up in the late games and I'm like, well, got to get off Christian McCaffrey. Should do that. And I remember one time specifically, I think it was like San Francisco versus Arizona was the last game. And I was just fucked. And I had Christian McCaffrey's like, well, time to get on James Conner. Hope this works out. And James Conner put up like 28 fantasy points and Christian McCaffrey got injured. And I ended up min cashing. I was like, that's why you fucking late swap. Because, I made $40 or something that week. I still lost my ass for the most part, but you still got to care about it. Yeah. Another question here from TTID Forever. Do I know, is that a metal band? TTID? I think it is. Anyway, Evan is coming back, but why is he only 1% owned? Great content, by the way. Appreciate the content comment. He's 1% owned because, like we said, like if you look at the ownership range here and you look at these salaries, like this is just where people are ending up. It's 58, 51, 56, 58, 63, 57, 66, 41, 48. Like,
what is he priced at? 7K?
Yeah, he's 7K. He's right
so
on the
yeah. So like the opportunity cost there is people are going to see that, and the 7K like slot price wise based on ownership and what we're seeing is reserved for Achane. So if you play Mike Evans, like you're probably not playing Devon Achane.
Yeah,
and I mean you can still play both, but I'm saying for people just hitting the button, right? He's not going to come up.
Right. So like it's one of those things where even if you consider Achane, right, like at 7,500, the other guys in that range are just Josh Jacobs and Kenneth Walker at 15% owned. And then outside of that, like it's Tyreek Hill that is the only other wide receiver that might get some ownership at 7K. Outside of that, you got nothing. It's just dead man's land. So I think that there's people that are worried about his hamstring, and there's people that are worried about, the offense in general. But like, I think that we have seen that the offense is still capable. Their offensive coordinator is smart and was able to scheme open Kate Otten. And I think that Mike Evans is really fucking good. Straight up Hall of Fame wide receiver. Already a Hall of Famer, by the way. Anybody who disagrees is fucking insane. He's just really good. And I think that he's going to get a lot of targets. I think he's going to get a lot of work. At 1% owned, he seems like a great upside play. I mean, if you were to ask me who I want to play between Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans, I would just flip a coin. I think they're both probably the exact same play this week. Only difference is ownership, and I think the ownership accounts for the fact that Tyreek Hill is a little bit more consistent in this spot. So, good question though. Tottenham till I die. It would make a really good name for metal band. I was trying to think, like, who am I thinking of?
Tottenham won 4-0 today against Man City. That kid must be geeked.
Let's fucking go. Yeah. Tottenham till I die. Talk to us about Schoonmaker. Why would I talk about Schoonmaker? Oh, is it because the injury to...
Is Ferguson out or something? Is that what's
Ferguson's concussed.
Oh, okay. How much is Schoonmaker? What is he, like min price?
I don't know. It's 2,500. I don't know, man. I don't
know if you care. I don't know if you care enough about him, honestly. It's like I don't know. It's like when you have a guy in Jonnu Smith who just put up a
still underpriced,
and he got a $300 increase. Like I don't see a reason. I mean, if you want to do it, you can. But James, I actually wanted to bring up something about the Mike Evans point. Hold on.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Talk about Schoonmaker. I think the Schoonmaker is fine at 2,500, especially if you use him to pair with, a Travis Kelce or a Brock Bowers in the flex. I think that is absolutely justifiable, and I think that's fine to do. Do I think that he is going to do well? I probably not. Like I would assume.
Nope.
Oh, hi.
I guess. Oh my gosh, he's speaking words now.
Yeah, that's my child.
They grow up so fast.
Take me
Damascus.
Can I take you to the shower? No, Daddy's live streaming right now.
Got his mother's
Isn't
hair.
that crazy? Dude, you're on camera. Can you say hello, 280 people that are seeing you right now? No, you can't?
No,
okay.
I can't.
You can't. Well, this is incredible. Can you say hello, friends? That's not hello, friends at all.
This is why you got to subscribe to the site. This is
this is the content. No, and go ask mom. Go ask mom.
Oh, you're definitely the villain now.
This fucking kid. That's incredible. I should go lock my door. Hold on. Because I don't want him to barge back in.
It's gonna barge back in and curse him out.
Yeah, I know he is. What I was gonna say about Mike Evans, and I wonder, I know James started this, but I wonder if I can screen share too. Can I?
I'm pretty sure that you can screen share. I can stop screen sharing.
Can? Okay, hold on one second. Where is
Also, while you get that loaded up, with Schoonmaker, yeah, I think he's fine. If you want to use him, I think he's fine at like very low ownership. But if he gets steamed up, man, I'll pass. I need that.
I'm with you on that. The one thing I wanted to talk about was this goes back to the leverage conversation we're talking about with the wide receivers, but the Mike Evans play, man, I kind of love that in a way, and I'm experimenting with this. I may change it, but I want to get at least two guys in this uncomfortable range here, and I want to see what I'm going to get. So this is a rule that I was playing around with before we got on the show, and you can make some really unique builds this week with very low ownership just by going a little bit out of that range. And Mike Evans is one of those guys, even from a scheme perspective. He torches single high. They play a lot of it at 7,100. He's also a guy that they love in the red zone too. So I'm not saying like this isn't a plays show where you're picking the best plays, but this is what I mean by you could find somebody with a similar upside path around these other receivers, and they have a proof of concept already that they've done it before, right? Like there's a real chance Mike Evans can go, 5 for 50 and catch 2 to 3 red zone touchdowns tomorrow. Like that's very in the realm of what he can do. I just wanted to highlight that, like, this is a rule that you could use in the optimizer to kind of force the leverage.
Yeah. I will say too, just like I'm kind of thinking through like stuff I've seen around the industry, stuff I've seen, from sharp people I talk to about DFS stuff. I think especially in smaller field or higher dollar stuff, I think you will see Miami be a popular stack. I don't think they're going to be chalk, but it's kind of like you have the chalk and then you have like, what is the sharp like pivot off of the chalk stacks? And I think Miami is like that shark pivot. And it's kind of like that Vince McMahon meme, right? Where it's like the 3 tiers. And Miami's like that second tier. I think that third tier with the laser eyes thing is you could, for the same price, pretty much just play a Tampa Bay stack. Like, I would not be shocked if Baker, Otten, and Mike Evans, put up points against the Giants and a backup QB, right? And like no one's gonna play it. And then like after the fact, everybody would be like, why didn't we even consider Tampa Bay with Mike Evans coming back?
Yeah. 100%. I want to point out, I don't do that super often. This was actually my fuck up because I usually lock my door when I'm doing these streams. Forgot to lock the door. But Go Ask Mom is a top tier thing that us dads have to rely on sometimes. Tribe knows all about this.
Yep. Times 4.
It's important. It's important. Let's see. Or that Evans may be limited hammy, which can be weird. Yeah, but he said that he was ready to go last week, and then they just played it safe. It's the same thing as Nico Collins. Like, I know that Nico Collins was limited, but the only reason why he was limited was because they beat Dallas into the fucking ground so hard that they didn't really need to utilize him. Yeah. And you could argue the same thing here, right? Like the Giants are a shitty team with a backup quarterback. Like there's very good chance that Tampa Bay just beats them into the fucking ground. They don't actually need all that much Mike Evans. But I think at that point you're just running into the issue of like trying to predict, this is a blowout, so they're not going to play the fourth quarter. So I could, but when you say that, you ignore that Steph Curry put up fucking 50 points in 3 quarters and that's why you're
not to mention Tampa Bay, even though like I know they've had some injuries and some tougher losses, they're like right in the playoff picture in their division too. There's no reason for them to not put their foot on the gas here. And if you think Tampa Bay like exceeds their team total, I have a hard time believing he's not a reason why.
Yeah, I need Mike Evans to have 1,000 receiving yards this year, just for the PFF report. Like I think that's super important because it's like the prettiest PFF chart in the world. Another question here really quick before we start to wrap things up. Are you trying to play Evans as a one-off or more so with Baker? I would be fine with him as a one-off. I'm fine with that. I don't think that you have to use Tampa Bay stacks. To Jason's point, I think that they will be under-owned. But yeah, I probably prefer him as a one-off. But I mean, pick your poison. Like if you have 3 to 5 lineups like me, I'm probably not going to be pairing him with Baker Mayfield in more than one of them. But if you have, a 50 to 100 lineups, then you probably want to have him in 25, 30% of them or something like that, right? Because that's where he really finds his ceiling. So, and to that point, Baker Mayfield's been really, really good this year, and was really good last year. So he's a good fantasy quarterback. Let us move towards kind of the end of this thing. We're going to talk a little bit about ownership on the total. So I have ownership pulled up here with Achane at the very top, and then Sutton, Brian Robinson, and then you kind of have a drop after that. Those three guys I think are going to be the main pieces of chalk that we see this week. I do think that you'll see Jaden Daniels be popular, but not as popular as we would expect. I do think that Anthony Richardson is going to end up 15 to 20% owned, and very likely much higher owned than any of his stacking pieces. So, for me, when I look at slates like this and I see a very clear range of ownership, a very clear people are jamming in these $5,000 to $6,000 pieces, I think that it's very easy to just take one or two of them and build in a different roster construction path. There's a lot of really good plays this week and a lot of really good stacks that I think you can be unique with. That being said, I also think that stacks like Denver and Las Vegas are going to be way underutilized. And so you can just kind of surround them with 5K to 6K wide receivers. And I don't mind doing that. I can eat a lot of chalk that way. While I think that the chalk is shaky, I think that Cortland Sutton and Jacoby Myers and Juwan Jennings, I think all these guys are really shaky. I also think that when it comes to building out lineups, my goal is not necessarily to care how shaky somebody is. My goal is to build a lineup that can win a GPP. The fact of the matter is that Cortland Sutton can win me a GPP at 5,800. Jacoby Myers, if played in the correct way, can win me a GPP. So I'm going to try to not be super selective on that way. It just kind of depends more on the way that I build out my initial stack and where I put my running back allocation. So I think this is a pretty good week to really pay attention to your roster construction. And I would say, for me, my personal lean is to get different with stacks. I would rather have a little bit less ownership on my stacks. I'm looking more at things like Las Vegas and Denver and Miami and Indianapolis too, right? I'm fine eating the Anthony Richardson chalk as long as I stack him. I like those kind of stacks more than I like the stacks that are kind of, Washington stacks and Detroit stacks. I think Detroit stacks are maybe a little bit too expensive. I think the Washington stacks are maybe not quite what I want them to be. So that's how I have things. Oh, an approach from Margaret. Baby, did you see Damascus run in on the stream?
I did not, and I didn't remember that you were on this stream in the first place, so now I'm a little embarrassed.
Hi, Margaret.
Neither one of you guys.
I made some grilled cheese. I made some tomato soup from scratch. Yeah,
all
this is from scratch.
Ooh, God, that looks fucking great.
Yo,
Thank you.
I'm gonna order some more crew neck sweaters from you.
Oh yeah, okay. Everybody, in the comments, bully Margaret and tell her that she needs to make merch for the site.
As a mother, if you bully me, I'm telling your wife. I'm telling
Joke's on you, Margaret. I'm not married yet.
I'm not talking about you, Jason.
I'm just trying to give you some money. I'm trying to support it.
I need to give our child a late night bath because he's screaming back. Oh my God, here he is. Go. Go.
James, what a life, man. You disappoint your son and you get dinner brought to you, man. If that's what fatherhood's like, I can't wait. I'm excited.
My life is incredible. Anyway, that was my read on the slate. Tribe, why don't you go ahead and go next?
Yeah. Looking at the ownership, these top three guys, I really don't have a problem with any of those top three guys. I probably am going to have a lot of exposure to them. I'm only going to play 3 to 5 lineups this week. So I'm not getting too crazy with it, but I agree with these mid-range receivers. The easiest way, in my opinion, to get off of those is just not stack those teams, right? I have no interest whatsoever in stacking San Francisco with a backup quarterback. I'm probably not stacking Washington. If I were playing more lineups, I would be with you, James, and I would stack Vegas, but 3 to 5, I'm probably not doing it. And so just by virtue of the stacks I'm playing with a team like Miami, like a team like Seattle, I'm just naturally going to get off of those guys. And I think that's a way for, anyone watching this that's why we kind of said, like, starting with your stacks is going to get you off of some of that and give you a unique construction. So I'm right there with you on that.
Yeah. Jason, what do you
Although
got?
I disagree with you about Detroit.
Oh, well, go fuck yourself. Jason, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, with these high owned plays, man, I can tell you right now, outside of a Denver stack and a bring back or Gardner Minshew that I'll put into my 150 runs, I'm not touching Jacoby Myers with a 10-foot pole. And it's not because I don't think he can pay off. I just think you're asking for a whole lot of a guy in a very mediocre offense. I would rather use somebody like him as a, I don't know, as a part of a bigger stack. I like as a one-off, he's completely out of consideration for me. I just think either going slightly below or slightly above that 5K range at wide receiver, I think that can win people tournaments this week. I really, really do. I'm obviously going to prioritize HN, but I still think you could poke a hole and say, well, if the Miami stack finally goes off and maybe he's not as involved in the passing game as he once was, you could leverage that too. But I definitely feel better about HN. Sutton, I do like a lot. I still think you can make pivots off him. But yeah, outside of Sutton and probably Calvin Ridley, I might just avoid most of that range outside of stack. So that's how I'm approaching the slate is just don't play volatile wide receiver chalk. If this was baseball, we'd be finding any reason to pivot off of these guys, right? If they were hitters, really high owned stack, they all have a floor of 0. They need somebody to throw them the ball. I really, really like going higher, paying up a wide receiver this week. So that's how I'm approaching the slate.
Yeah, I think that you could very, very easily make a rule to say do not use these 5 to 6K wide receivers without their quarterback. And I think that would be a totally fair rule to make. Don't use them as one-offs, just use them in stacks. I think that's totally fair. Don't use, Jacoby Myers without Gardner Minshew. Don't use Juwan Jennings without, I literally don't even remember the name of the quarterback who's playing for San Francisco.
Brandon Allen.
Brandon Allen. Yeah. Don't use Juwan Jennings without Brandon Allen. Don't use Brandon Allen without Bo Nix. I think that all of those are very fair rules to set up and optimizers this week. That'll get you some. It'll get you under the field, but you have a little bit more. That is going to do it for us. If you have been tuning in and have not, seen this show before, thanks for tuning in. My name is James Cool. I'm the owner of PaydirtDFS.com. As you can see, logo right here. We have a whole bunch of different things over at the site, research sheets, models, tools. We have a newsletter. We have an About Us page, which I made. Everybody should be proud of it. I'm not a web developer, so fucking, clap for me. We also have a whole bunch of different subscription options. You can get $40 a month for everything, $35 for sports specific. We have some season-long stuff for NBA and for NFL, and then we also have weekly and daily subscription options. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys have any questions, you can reach out to the Discord, which is free to join. You can find me over on Twitter. Also, free to find me there. And yeah, if you guys got any questions, just let me know. This has been Slate Talk for NFL DFS Week 12, and we will talk